I know you're not all here to see me, so I'll be as brief as I can. And I apologize for speaking in English. You're certainly not going to understand my German. So we're going to look very quickly at the future of animal agriculture, particularly focusing on the cow. But before I do that, I just want to give you a little bit of context by going back in history to look at a previous disruption where another animal was replaced by a superior technology. So this is New York City, 1900. I borrowed these slides from my co-founder, Tony Sieber. And he asked the question, where's the car? Oh, well, there's one car. The slide doesn't seem to be working too well. Fast forward just 13 years. Same scene. Where's the horse? We have one horse. That's just 13 years. It's a very fast disruption. In fact, it took just 20 years from 1905 to 1925 for the car to go from just 5% of the market to 95% of the market. And that was at a time when there was no oil industry, no gas stations, no mechanics, no supply chains. There were very few paved roads, and no one knew how to drive, but just 20 years. So the message here is that disruptions, when they happen fast. And they don't go in a straight line. They're non-linear. They go in an S-curve. They start slowly, and then they accelerate. And they can have profound impacts on society. But we're very poor at forecasting, at seeing them coming. We tend to stumble into them and then clean up the mess afterwards. So let's look at the cow. And I want to go back in history again. Because about 10,000 years ago, we started the long process of domesticating animals. And for millennia, we used cows for all kinds of things, not just for meat and materials. We use them for transport, for energy. We use them as a store of value. We also use them as a store of food over the winter and for lean times. They're a critical part of our culture and played a role in religions as well. But over the millennia, almost all of those uses have been displaced by better technologies. And all we're left with today are materials and food. But within that category, we see an explosion of uses. We find cows now in pretty much everything. There's cow in your sugar. There's cow in roads. There's cow in cosmetics. It's quite extraordinary. But it's a very inefficient technology. It takes a huge amount of land, feed, and water to grow a cow. It takes 2 or 3 years. And out of it, as well as the useful products, we also get greenhouse gas emissions and all kinds of waste products. But we're on the cusp, we think, of a disruption of animal agriculture. There's some extraordinary new technologies developing that have the potential to displace the cow. And I just want to look at one of these technologies. And it's based on the age-old process of fermentation, which we've used for millennia to make everything from yogurt and bread to wine and beer. But more recently, we've been able to harness fermentation to produce, far more precisely, to produce all kinds of things like enzymes for cleaning fluids. And now, with a combination of information technologies and biotechnologies, which are all improving at an extraordinary rate, we're able to produce almost anything. We're able to harness microbes to produce pretty much any organic molecule that we want. And that creates incredible possibilities. It's far broader than just food. These technologies are going to be applied to healthcare, to cosmetics, to materials, and more. And it also enables another key technology, cellular agriculture, the ability to grow cells in the laboratory. Because we can produce the growth medium, the most expensive part of that process, using this modern fermentation technology. So just very briefly, essentially it makes the impossible possible. All kinds of things that we just can't get from animals. Insulin's a great example. Insulin used to come from the pancreas of a cow and a pig. It took 23,000 animals to produce just 1 pound of insulin. And it wasn't a very good product. It was poorly tolerated. It caused all kinds of allergic reactions. But using this technology, we're able to produce insulin from humans, a much better, superior product. And now far lower cost. And we can produce all kinds of things. Jellyfish leather's been made. We can make leather of all shapes and sizes, unconstrained by the starting point, the cow. So we can produce meat using cellular agriculture. It's a bit behind plant-based agriculture, the other form of meat making. But it's coming down in cost very quickly, and we'll have a look at that in a second. Impossible Foods is a good example of combining modern fermentation with plant extracts. And we're producing burgers now of almost equal quality to those that come from animals. So cost. So the Impossible Burger is now in every Burger King in the US. And it costs just $1 more than a burger from a cow. And the cost is coming down fast. We think by the mid-2020s it will be far cheaper than a burger from a cow. Cellular agriculture has the potential to be the cheapest form of production, but it's still much more expensive. But just 5 years ago, it took $300,000 to produce 1 kilo of beef. Sorry, to produce one burger patty. It now costs just $300 to produce 1 kilo of beef. And that figure's dropping very fast. And again, by the late 2020s, we should be below the price of beef from cows. And the other thing beyond costs that drives adoption of new technologies are their capabilities. And this is where we're seeing incredible improvements in terms of taste, structure, mouthfeel, nutrition, and so on. These products are improving very, very fast. And in terms of their impact on society, our health, how we tolerate them, in terms of price volatility, now that we're freed from the vagaries of the weather, food security, the environment, and more, they're better on almost every parameter. And each version that gets released is going to be better than the previous one. And within just a decade or so, we think they'll be better on every parameter than the meat that comes from animals. And so how far and how fast will this disruption go? We don't quite know yet. It's still very early. But all technology disruptions move in this S-curve. And we think that by the late 2020s, by 2030 at the latest, it will have very significant impact on the market for meat. And close behind, pigs and other livestock. No animal is safe from this disruption. And in terms of land use, we use a huge amount of land to grow animals. You can see here the amount of pasture we use for cows, the amount of livestock feed down here, and this is the amount of food we eat. Most of our agricultural land goes into producing animals. If we free ourselves from animal agriculture, we'll have extraordinary opportunities to repurpose that land and use it for all kinds of other things. There are impacts across society, the environment, enormous impact potentially on greenhouse gas emissions. Cows are one of the biggest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions. But if we replace them in the food system, the impact will be profound. The effect of deforestation, driven largely actually by animal agriculture, growing soya in land that used to be rainforest. And palm oil is another big cause of deforestation, but people are already producing palm oil at less than the cost of palm oil from forests. Extraordinarily exciting. And in terms of our health, these products can be far healthier. We can have pretty much any food we want with any nutrients. So we could have cookies with the nutritional properties of a cow burger, for instance. Better for foodborne diseases and so on. All kinds of effects. So this is a hugely exciting disruption, but it's not predetermined. It's not guaranteed to happen. The choices we make as investors, as consumers, but most importantly as policymakers will determine the outcome. Germany had huge success early on in the solar revolution. They led the way, but eventually got surpassed by China. We see the German car manufacturing industry lagging behind in the production of electric vehicles. You have the world's best brewing industry. Let's hope you can take advantage of it and lead this disruption. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jamie, for that wonderful overview. And I would like now to invite Elizabeth Abergel, who is working, as I mentioned, at the Rachel Carson Center here in Munich as a fellow on the whole question of biopolitics of cultured meat, to maybe give your reactions to this. I mean, do you believe that this is all hype, all of this area of cultured meat? You may stand if you like, or sit, or whatever you're more comfortable with.
Well, I mean, this sounded absolutely wonderful, didn't it? I mean, you just want to believe it so much because it's going to resolve all the problems that we have currently with our food system. The talk about disruption, I find very disrupting myself because it's not really disrupting the industrial food system. It's actually taking us to a higher level of industrialization, one that takes at its basic unit of production the living cell. So it's saying we can do it better than the animal. We can do it better than thousands and thousands of years of evolution. So I don't choose to call it clean meat or cell-based meat or cultured meat. I call it edible animal tissues because that's what they are. As a sociologist, I ask myself, what do these changes actually mean in terms of our social fabric? What are they investing us into? What are they engaging us? What is this commitment towards meat that we have? I mean, isn't the problem the sort of the Western diet? Couldn't we just work at the level of trying to disrupt the actual food system the way it exists now, rather than looking for these high-tech fixes, these techno fixes? So I believe that we're not going to engineer ourselves out of the problems that we're facing today. I think that we need to look and do the hard work, the hard ethical, social, political, economic work that we need to do in order to ask ourselves, well, the choices that we make today in terms of what we eat, how it's produced, where it comes from, there are major demographic changes coming about. The demand for meat is going to increase by double by the year 2050. So what do? Instead of looking for the high-tech solutions, shouldn't we be looking towards trying to make things better the way that we are doing it now, the way that they used to be done? I mean, I'm not romanticizing the past or anything, but I think there are ways that we can use that do not alienate us from nature, that do not alienate us from the food that we eat and that we produce, and do not alienate us from the animals. So I think that also my feelings come from this past life that I had as a molecular geneticist. I worked in the laboratory. I worked for some biotech companies. I did plant tissue culture. I did animal tissue culture. And it never crossed my mind in a million years that one day I would be eating those things that I was producing in the lab. So when you understand the processes involved in cellular agriculture of growing cells, stem cells, and the products that go into keeping cells alive, differentiating them, then scaling them up, you realize that this is not animal-free meat that we're talking about, because a lot of animals actually need to be killed in order for this to come about. So the growth medium that was alluded to, at this point in time, it still mainly uses fetal calf serum, which is a major byproduct of the slaughter of cows. So it needs to replicate the environment that the embryonic cells would differentiate in. There are also all kinds of other products that come from animals that go into the making of these cells. So it's not yet realized. It's not completely slaughter-free. It's not completely animal-free. And I think that the denomination as a meat is problematic. It's not meat. It is edible tissues, animal tissues. Even if it's plant-based meat, I mean, I don't think it's meat. And whatever, if it's plant-based or animal-based or whatever, these foods are ultra-processed. They're ultra-processed, they're biofabricated, and so all kinds of other chemical and biological processes and interventions go into making them, which have not yet been tested. So we don't know what the effects will be on health. We don't test foods the same way that we test drugs. So I think that we have to be really careful because these technologies are highly speculative. They're not real. I know the museum exhibit makes it sound like, the brave new world is within reach. But unfortunately, these technologies are yet highly experimental. They're highly speculative. And so we shall see what the future brings. But my belief is that we should work within the limits that we have, because I think that the idea of disrupting, or the idea that we can technologically fix the future is really based on this idea of technological progress, and that technology is going to save us. And what that does is it morally prevents us from thinking about what we should be doing today, right now, and every day as we eat. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. So I will give Jamie a chance to respond to this, but first I would very much like to hear what Richard David Precht has to say, especially as in your talk you spoke about the potential benefits of moving away from slaughtering cows, but also the risks of the Googlifying the meat industry. So maybe your response first, and then we'll give Jamie a chance to reply.
Yes, I'd like to give you the question. What do you think who will make the big business of the cultured meat? Because that's a very, very interesting question. Another interesting question is to ask, what will all the million of people do who are now in the cow industry? Not only in Patagonia, or not only in the United States, also in Kenya, for example, with a lot of people living from their cattle, and they cannot live from their cattle anymore if it is cheaper to produce cultured meat. So we will have a lot of social problems, and we will have a lot of questions about unemployment, for example. And you cannot say, okay, there are cows now, and in the future there will be vegetables. This is possible in some areas in the world, but it's not possible, for example, in Patagonia, where you cannot plant all the vegetables. So what we are doing here has a lot of social impact. And it's very difficult if you make a very, very fast progress, not thinking and rethinking the social implications. And I think this is the point.
Yeah. No, I fully agree with you. One of the reasons we set up Rethink X, my organization, was to try and look at these social implications, the environmental implications, the political implications, because there are undoubtedly going to be massive impacts across society. And we're going to see, it's not just food, this is not just jobs that we're going to lose in agriculture. I mean, what we've done historically is we've stumbled into disruptions and we've cleaned up the mess afterwards. And we've managed to do that just about as we've gone about our business. But that's not acceptable, because we've got disruptions now coming across multiple sectors of the economy. So autonomous vehicles, for instance, are going to kill driving jobs across the economy. We're going to lose jobs in agriculture here. Maybe we create some new jobs, but they're different jobs. They're not suited to the people who lose their jobs, different skills. And I think it's a profound question for society, is what do we do about this? How do we rethink our social contract? How do we rethink how we feel about, or how we think about work and reward and other things? Because if we don't change it, we're going to have huge social unrest. We're going to have big, big problems with all kinds of consequences that we can't possibly foresee. So I think we need to be thinking about a whole new social contract, how we reward people, how we motivate people, how we find purpose in our lives and so on. And I think it's a major, major problem that we have.
Just one technical question. Elizabeth said in her talk that we were still very dependent on the fetal bovine serum as a growth medium for cultured meat, but I understand from both of you that it is not necessarily the case, that there are alternatives now. Maybe would either of you like to respond on that?
Yeah, so, the first thing to say is cellular agriculture is far more speculative. I absolutely agree, and it's further out. But this disruption will happen without cellular agriculture. We'll be producing essentially meat from plants. I mean, we can find every molecule in meat in plants. And so Impossible Foods, for instance, are producing what's called heme, which is a kind of critical ingredient that gives their burger the meat-like appearance and taste. And they can produce that through fermentation. And over time, they'll produce some of the proteins and some of the fats in that method as well. But yeah, there are issues. But in terms of the serum, we are finding solutions. Now, they're still a work in progress. But in my discussions with those involved, the businesses that are leading this, that's not seen as a long-term issue. They're using it currently, but it's certainly not something that's going to be around for much longer, and they've already found solutions. They're not cost parity yet, but they're getting there. So I don't think it's a longer-term issue.
It's interesting, these plant-based approaches seem to be, in a way, going faster than the animal cell-based approaches. So I was impressed that the biggest IPO and the most successful IPO of 2019 was not of a tech company, but it was actually Beyond Meat, so a plant-based meat company making the Beyond Burger. So it seems this is a kind of interesting development. So I wonder about plant-based versus animal-based, but I'd like to give Elizabeth a chance to quickly reply, and then I would like to open it up to the audience because I know you will have questions.
I just wanted to respond to the fetal calf serum question because that's one that comes up all the time. And we hear from the practitioners that maybe they found alternatives, but they're not yet up to par. The issue is that, yes, they can find solutions, but the yield is a problem. The yield, and right now, there are many constraints that are actually preventing the cellular agriculture from actually being realized, and that's why it's so speculative, as you were saying. And these are technical constraints, but and they're also cost constraints, and they're constraints dealing with scaling up to make industrial quantities of this meat. So if you change the fetal bovine serum and you try and find alternatives that are plant-based or bacterial-based, you can certainly get the cells to grow and proliferate, but they will not do it in the same way as they would using that particular culture medium. So that is still one of the, I would say, the preventing factors from, the industry really coming to the fore. And as far as other products are concerned, I mean, to make the cellular meat or edible animal tissues taste and look like meat, it takes many, many steps. And these involve antibiotics, hormones, fats, proteins, etc. So it's a real industrial process. So I'm not sure that we're going to industrialize our way out of industrial agriculture. And I think that, yes, there are disruptions that happen every so often, but we're always trying to fix the messes that we made in the first place. And I think we come to a point in our history where the messes are now, we have to kind of reckon with some of the things that we have to deal with, notably climate change and so on. So I think that I'm not sure that we should put all our investments in these technologies.
Thank you. I would like to give the audience